studying international relations and comparative literature. And I'll pass it on to Chris.
Thank you so much. My name is Chris Gossett, and I'm currently an incoming senior year college student, working also as an intern for the Cities for CEDAW campaign. I'm also one of the members from CEDAW Youth Organization, located all the way from Merriam College in the Philippines. So before we go ahead with the interview, I'd like to provide a brief background about our special guest we have today. So this woman was a UN observer for the League of Women Voters in the years between 2017 and 2020. She has served as the co-chair of action and advocacy for the League of Women Voters in the Fairfax area that is located in the state of Virginia. Not only is that she is a trial attorney and a judge pro tempore in the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas, but she is also a registered nurse who has earned a Master of Science in Nursing and has worked primarily with women and children facing healthcare challenges. So this organization, which is the League of Women Voters in Fairfax, which is represented by our guest, they have worked tirelessly with about 12 groups on a year-long campaign for the passage of CEDAW resolution by the Fairfax Board of Supervisors. And eventually on March 8th of this year, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors had already adopted a resolution in support of CEDAW, which is the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So this Fairfax County resolution, adopted during the same day as the International Women's Day, it calls for the review of existing initiatives and identification of additional measures necessary to raise awareness of the status of women in the community. So without further ado, let us welcome with a warm round of virtual applause to Ms. Jill Follis today. It's a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much as well. So let's get started, shall we? Christy and I will be asking you some questions today, and we hope you'd be able to answer them and hopefully impart with us a valuable lesson on the significance of gender equality and women empowerment. So to begin, let's talk about your starting point. So how were you able to build this campaign and lead these organizations? Like, what was your motivation for this action?
Great question. It's two parts. The motivation or the inspiration came from attending events at the United Nations, where about 5 years ago, I went to a parallel event at the Commission on the Status of Women and heard Soon Young Yoon give a presentation about the Cities for CEDAW educational campaign. As you noted, I do have a background in women's issues, both as a registered nurse who did a lot of work with women and children, and also as a trial attorney, where many of my clients were female. And it was also a big deal to be a female trial attorney in Philadelphia County because it was unusual. So the inspiration came from being at the UN, surrounded by so many motivated, educated, exciting women, including Soon Young. So I came home to Fairfax County after being at CSW and thought everybody needs to go up to CSW and have that experience. But if they can't, then we're going to bring CSW home. And we started by talking to a woman in Fairfax County who headed up a program on racial equity, which is a new program, maybe 5 or 6 years old in Fairfax County. And we asked her whether there was any data collected on women, because we recognize the intersectionality of women and race in terms of identifying areas of discriminatory actions or behaviors. And she said, no, Fairfax County had not collected information on women. And so I was able to say, would you be interested in learning about it? And she said, yes, provide me the information. So at that point, I went to a group called the Human Rights Special Interest Group, and with them created a guidebook on CEDAW, which talked about the reasons you should have it and the reasons that opponents say you should not. It outlines the various articles of CEDAW, and we circulated this guidebook to all of the various organizations in our county that we knew were focused on women's issues, and brought together a group of 12 organizations, which pursued a resolution in support of CEDAW. And we did the whole thing from the guidebook all the way through a secure resolution in less than a year. So we moved very quickly, and I attribute that to 4 types of people that were in our group. First, the historians, those people who had been around the block. They knew about CEDAW. They had been to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and had actually worked with cities for CEDAW in its inception, in its beginning years. So they were able to give us the information that we needed that was historical in nature. They told us that everything that we do is local in nature. Human rights are local in nature. So let's think globally, act locally. The other types of people we had in the group was the convener. This is the person who had the vision, how to put this whole resolution together. Then we had the need for advocates, those people who were political insiders. They knew the system. They knew the supervisors. This is a county that we were working in, Fairfax County, not a city. We have over 1 million people, more than half of whom are female. And we needed to have insiders who knew how to get access to our supervisors and their staff. So they were essential players. And finally, the support of all of the people in the working group. And as Margaret Mead has said, you should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed women can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So, as I said, from soup to nuts, we got a resolution passed in support of CEDAW on International Women's Day 2022.
Thank you so much, Jill. Following up on what you said about groups, how often did your groups meet? And what was the process with coordinating with so many people? Were there any challenges in organizing with so many groups?
We met monthly, and the challenges were that not every group had a backup person to attend if the primary lead for that group was unable to attend. So there was a need to do a lot of emailing to keep everybody in the loop.
So, what was that one thing that you consider a memorable experience that greatly benefited your role in advocacy within these organizations and in the society?
What was the most rewarding thing, perhaps? I would say it was the opportunity to convene so many talented women and men actually here together and be able to develop our mutual interest in supporting women's human rights. It became obvious that there are so many people so interested in this issue that every time we would have a meeting, you would just kind of get all pumped up.
Thank you so much, Jill. Do you think there were many challenges in terms of like grassroots organizations, like when in regards to advocacy and engaging with like the local constituents? Would you say there are any challenges or any highlights regarding that?
I would say that it's difficult to work with local groups until you have laid the foundation of an educational campaign and inform all of the groups of the fundamentals of CEDAW. And we start basics. And here in Fairfax County, what we learned was that even though many of the organizations did get up to speed and could speak to CEDAW, in the end, when we got the resolution passed, the supervisors said they still wanted to do their own research, which is why our resolution in the county seems like we're now doing a little bit of waiting for the supervisors to learn more. They learned a lot from us, but they still need to learn more. So there's a real need to do an educational campaign before you start the action advocacy piece of this project.
All right, thank you. So for regarding with the county resolution that is in support of the women's right, what do you think is like has the working group that you've collaborated with has been helpful in achieving this milestone?
The working group was essential for building the connections with the supervisors. We have 10 supervisors in Fairfax County. And because we had groups that represented thousands of women in their membership ranks, we were able to connect at least a member of one of our groups with each supervisor so that we could get into their office virtually, because we were really still stuck in the COVID pandemic. But we were able to make connections over Zoom and phone that we would not have been able to do if we didn't have this grassroots support. And also the supervisors made it clear that they recognized the value of all of these organizations coming together, as opposed to one group coming forward on its own. So the convening of this group of 12 organizations was key in success.
Do you think that that was a major role in the relative short time period of the campaign, or would you say there were other factors into it? And also a follow-up to that, how do you think COVID affected your campaign, since we're still very much in the pandemic?
The organizational structure that we had of our 12 organizations was probably the most important factor in securing a resolution in a very short period of time. It was also a reason why we didn't get as much as we asked for. We drafted our organization, our working group of 12 organizations drafted a resolution. We asked for about 8 things. The primary first 3 key ones were do a gender equity study, set up a oversight group to make sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed, work gets done. And 3, give us funding if we can, if we need it to secure this gender equity study or get a person in with the expertise we need to get the work done. So the group was important in being able to come together with our knowledge of CEDAW and put forward what we wanted. But because we worked so quickly, the supervisors didn't have a chance to get on board with all of the information ahead of time. And so they needed to take a step back, and they did that with their resolution saying, we are going to do our own research now on a countywide basis and get back to you. So at this point, they have set a September 22nd this year deadline to put together their report. And our working group has set up a steering committee of representatives from 3 of the dozen organizations to track it and make sure that they kind of hold the supervisor's foot to the fire, and see if we can't get back to our goals of the gender equity study, the oversight committee, and the financing. With regard to COVID, I don't think COVID really played a role, either positive or negative. The trick was to find times when our organizations could get together, not whether we could get the job done with the supervisors, because volunteers have day jobs, and it's very challenging to find the time to meet and get our work done. But we could always talk with the supervisors. So I don't think COVID had much to do with it. I actually think the Zoom calls and conference calls of different sorts have been very successful, and took up less time commuting otherwise to get around to different supervisors' offices in our very large county.
Was there like a specific language in the resolution that you had to be really careful about, or why not? Like, are there these same concerns that are informing an ordinance?
Is there, in our particular resolution, was there anything that we were concerned with? Is that the question, Chris? Or do you want to restate the question? I'll try again to hear you.
Yes, like if there is any specific language in the resolution that you had to take note.
I would say, this is me as a lawyer, there's an omission. There's something left out of the resolution as opposed to something that's in it that is of concern. What's left out is a deadline. I just meant, when are we going to get this work done by the county, which they promised to do? I mentioned September 22nd. That deadline was set in what's called a board matter here in the county. That's an official document that you can Google and find. But the actual resolution, the language in the resolution, failed to repeat the deadline. So it's important that our working group not rely exclusively on the resolution, but remember to look to what's called the board matter and make sure that we do hold the supervisor's feet to the fire on their September 22nd deadline. We need to accelerate the work in order to achieve, gender equity, not take a pause or push the pause button.
So in terms of the board matter, what data are you hoping to get from the September 22 resolution? Could you speak a little bit more on that?
The board matter basically says the same thing as the resolution, except for it had the added information about a deadline. I think deadlines are important. You have to be held, you have to hold people accountable for what they offer or suggest or promise to do. If you don't, people just slip or things fall between the cracks. It's so important to have a deadline and then to make sure people stick to it.
All right, so how do you think that other groups could also start off by building an educational campaign?
I think that there are many ways to do it. Number one, get as many people as you can through their organizations to go up to the Commission on the Status of Women in New York every March, including elected officials that should be invited by nonprofit volunteer organizations. That's where you get the enthusiasm. That's where the excitement builds, and people then go home and implement the work that needs to be done. 2, talk to people who've already accomplished either securing a resolution or an ordinance. You can find those people by going to the Cities for CEDAW website. You can look at the page that talks about the different resolutions or ordinances. You can find out who's who. And then you can start to compare the different resolutions and ordinances from city to city or county to county. Some of them have deadlines. Some of them do not even mention CEDAW. They are more broad scope. They say we're talking about human rights for women, and they avoid the controversy that some counties and cities have when you talk about the United Nations. So some resolutions are very specific and talk about issues such as the need to address specifically violence against women, intersectionality issues, economic factors, social factors. So you can learn from the Cities from CEDAW website about the various approaches taken in different cities and counties, which is very instructive and was very helpful in getting our Fairfax work underway.
I actually wanted to ask a little bit more on the arguments in each different county. When looking at the resolutions in, for example, states like Kentucky, having the argument or mention of abortion can quickly kill CEDAW, like in an instant. Could you speak a little bit more on the arguments against CEDAW in Fairfax County? And what was the argument of the opposition and how did it affect the campaign?
The argument against CEDAW in Fairfax County was a 1 supervisor nay vote versus 9 supervisors yay. So it was a minor, non-essential argument, but the argument was that the United Nations, generally speaking, was an organization that did not speak true to its mission to uphold human rights throughout the world. And the one supervisor who voted, the one supervisor who was not in favor of CEDAW in Fairfax County, just basically said, I don't approve of the way the United Nations operates internationally. And it was not a CEDAW argument. It was a United Nations, you don't want to talk about the United Nations at all in Fairfax County. Again, that was 1 nay vote out of 10. So it was not meaningful. With regard to abortion, abortion did not come up by March. Certainly, as soon as we got our resolution passed on March 8th, with the case coming up before the Supreme Court that deals with abortion, the press and the court decisions really took over, and it became a very prominent argument. My research on abortion as it pertains to CEDAW is that the language of CEDAW itself, the actual convention, does not mention abortion at all. You can read it, start to finish. It does not mention abortion. It talks about being in favor of women's reproductive rights, but it does not mention abortion. If you then look to the CEDAW committee's general recommendations, I think it's number 25, 27, 29, somewhere in the high 20s, it does mention abortion for one purpose only, and that is to say that the committee recommends that no nation state impose criminal charges on a woman who seeks and secures an abortion. Again, the committee makes recommendations The recommendations are not law in any nation. They are simply recommendations. And that's the extent of what I understand CEDAW says about abortion. So it's not a document that you can waive as being in favor of or against abortion, because it doesn't go there. And I can't remember, there's another topic that'll come back to me. So when the next question comes up, maybe it'll click again.
Could you give us a little more information on what's your current process for the building a CEDAW ordinance and within the Fairfax?
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, we have set up a steering committee so that going forward, instead of the one person leading the CEDAW activity to secure the resolution, which is what I was doing for the past year, we are now moving forward with a steering committee of 3 people who represent 3 of the 12 organizations in the working group. And right now, they are planning the development of the relationships with the supervisors, the ongoing relationships with the supervisors, so that it becomes a more effective, efficient approach, so that the supervisors hear from our working group frequently and recognize that we are here to support them as they learn more about CEDAW and can come to us working group members as subject matter experts. And also the steering committee has the charge to make sure that the September 22nd deadline is met, and also to remind the members of the Board of Supervisors that we did prepare and submit a draft resolution, which has about 8 issues we would like to see the county address, and that they should keep that in mind as they move forward.
In terms of working groups, was there more connection over with the UN Women chapters or through the Cities for CEDAW network to gain more resources about drafting a resolution?
The working group came together because when I came back from the United Nations, having spent 3 years there as one of the representatives from the United States League of Women Voters, I saw what types of organizations were attending the Commission on the Status of Women. So when I came back, I knew that Zonta International was very much engaged. I knew that the American Association of University Women was very much engaged in the issue. And I knew that the League of Women Voters was engaged in this issue. And so I just used the names of the groups, the NAACP, and then many of our local groups that were interested in violence against women, domestic violence. The names just readily came to me, having been communicating with those groups up in New York. And so once you find a group of women who know something about CEDAW, you'll be surprised how excited people get and how quickly you can move forward.
Do you have like future plans, projects and responsibilities you're looking forward to? Will you be also collaborating with other relevant groups and campaigns such as Cities for CEDAW?
I will be working with Soon Young and Jessica and some of you folks who are on this call on the digest, which hopefully we'll be pulling together over the next year. So let's see how that goes, but I'm very much looking forward to that project. The other work that goes forward is through the Human Rights Special Interest Group, which you can find online at hrsig.org, which is the group I'm very interested in, which is a group of people who attended the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women several years ago and have gone back repeatedly to learn more. And we write informative educational documents about human rights issues more broadly than just women. So you'll find them about voting. You'll find them about the SDGs. You'll find an article about the overview of all of the 9 core United Nations human rights treaties. So that's kind of where we're going forward on many different fronts.
That's amazing, Jill. That's so inspiring. I just wanted to redirect the conversation back to the campaign. What do you think are some important milestones for a campaign on their way to getting a resolution through the council and getting it passed?
What were the milestones? What was the big deal? I think it was pulling together the right people. As I mentioned before, we needed the historians to tell us, to make sure we were on the right path and thinking globally, acting locally. We needed the convener. We needed someone to pull all the organizations together, keep everybody in touch. We needed the political insiders. And that was the piece that really got us charged up in the last, let's say, 3 months prior to March 8th, when we started sitting down with the supervisors and their staff, sharing documents. We were asked by the supervisors to supply additional information other than our guidebook. So I drafted a briefing book, and a briefing book pulled heavily from the information found in the Cities for CEDAW website, especially the pages on the different resolutions in various counties across the United States. That was the kind of information that the supervisors wanted to see. They want to be able to compare and contrast how much detail they should put in or how much they should keep the resolution open-ended. So that was the briefing book materials, as well as it included a document that had been, that was a resolution that came before the Virginia state legislature in the prior year, which said they were, that the Virginia State House of Delegates supported the 40th anniversary of CEDAW. So sometimes when you hit these big milestone dates, you can bring attention to your issue by celebrating a date, which is why we tried to get our resolution, and we're successful in getting our resolution passed on March 8th, which was International Women's Day. We found that the media was more interested in hearing about an issue that was local, that had connections to something bigger, something international, such as March 8th. And so I think it's important to look at celebrating dates and bringing that to the attention of the media.
How do you think that the media play a role in this campaign?
The media came on board after the resolution passed. The media in Fairfax County was not engaged prior to securing the resolution. And that was intentional. We knew here in Fairfax County that out of our 10 supervisors, 9 are politically aligned with the Democratic Party, and 1 is aligned with the Republican Party. So as any good advocate knows, you want to know where everybody is likely to fall, or what likely vote they're going to make before you start a campaign, or before you engage the media. we had a sense that we were going to be successful in Fairfax County when we started. And we wanted to make sure that we were successful before we started promoting our work through the media. So it was a intentional choice to hold off on engaging the media until the group of 12 organizations coalesced around a draft resolution and all agreed on what we wanted to do together. And that takes time and a lot of commitment from all of the members of the various organizations. We couldn't very well start having each one of us go out to the media on our own with our own organization ahead of time. We needed to wait till we were all working together and spoke with one voice. And that took us all the way up until March 8th.
So in this case, not having the media actually helped your campaign a lot from what I'm hearing.
It was our intention to wait until our 12 organizations coalesced around the issue of how we wanted to present CEDAW to the supervisors. And so we did not want to reach out as independent groups. You know, we didn't want one group going to the media or another group going to another news outlet. So we waited, and it, in my opinion, was clearly the right approach.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I also wanted to ask on another approach that the campaign had, which I think you mentioned before, it was think globally, act locally. Could you talk a little bit more on that, and how do you think it helped the campaign?
Yes, think globally, act locally is a term of art that comes out of the United Nations. If I'm not mistaken, it comes out of it may come out of the Office on the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It may not, but it's United Nations for sure. And it means that a lot of work has been done on the global stage, starting with Eleanor Roosevelt, the former First Lady of the United States, who led a delegation for the United States to Geneva, Switzerland, back in the 1940s, to draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she chaired the international groups that came together and pulled all of the various delegates together to create one far-reaching human rights document. I think her leadership in showing you how you work with other organizations and other people to get one beautifully written document that's been translated in over 500 languages. It's probably the most translated document into different languages of all, is inspiring and should set the tone for how other organizations can work together to speak with one voice. She had to put up with some woman from the country of India who came and said, you know, Mrs. Roosevelt probably back then, it's important that we talk about all human beings being entitled to human rights, because the first draft of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights talked about all men are entitled to human rights. Now, men at the time, Mrs. Roosevelt said, is just the way we speak. And it means it's inclusive of women. But Hansa Mehta, I think her name was, from India, said that's not true. We need to recognize that human beings is inclusive of men and women. But when you use the term men, like we do in the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that's not inclusive of women. And I've gone off on a soapbox. Bring me back.
No, that was really informative. Thank you so much. It really shows how language does play a major role in these kinds of documents. That was actually the last question we had on our list. So we thank you so much for being here and being so inspiring, and for just setting an example for us, the Youth for CEDAW group, to really follow in the future.